Okay. Hi, Radhia. How are you?
Hey, Doug. Nice to sort of see you.
Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. It's nice to have you with us.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
I see your book in the background called The Followers. And interestingly enough, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had somebody on who also had a similar story. They spent 23 years in a cult in New York City. Was yours in New York City?
No,
Okay, so it's
no.
not the same.
It started in really in Los Angeles, and then it went to Austin, Texas, which is where I am now.
Okay, so this wasn't the same person. The person that he got involved with was a woman named Sharon Gans. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She was sort of a, not to go into the story too much detail, but she was sort of a failed actress. And
So was my guy. He was a guy. His name
okay,
was well, he had many names, but his name was Jaime Gomez, and he was a failed actor as well.
okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about your story. So, was this a religious cult,
It was a spiritual,
a
yes. It was,
spiritual cult? Okay.
yeah.
How did you get involved?
Mostly based on Eastern spirituality, meditation based.
So, how did you meet this person? How did you get involved?
Well, that's a really long story. I'll try and make it brief. I grew up in Los Angeles, in Brentwood per se, and in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, lots of things were going on in LA and in the culture at that time. There was a lot of Eastern spirituality influence coming in, to both the East and the West Coast. And there was a lot of changes. There was civil rights and gay rights and women's rights and all kinds of cultural upheavals going on. And so I think myself and a lot of friends were sort of looking for a deeper spiritual connection. And so this was a time where there was a lot of Eastern influence coming in. So you had, Rajneesh, and you had Yogananda, and you had Maharaji and Maharishi, and on and on and on. So that was intriguing to me. And I talk about, my book is in three parts. So the first part is called The Journey, which is my life, what it was like growing up at that time and what I was searching for. And then the second part of the book is called The Buddha Field, which is a nickname that we gave our group. It didn't have an official name. As a matter of fact, the leader, as his pathology developed, he became more and more clandestine, more and more paranoid. So he never established a religion or anything like that. Um, it was loosely based on four techniques that he basically stole from Maharaji, originally called the knowledge, but then he changed it to the knowing to make it his own. And then the third part, well, so our nickname for that group was the Buddha Field. As I said, the doctrine was more Eastern, or it could be Western mysticism. So Buddhism, Hinduism, Christian mysticism all sort of rolled up into one. And based on, the simplest way I can put it is based on the search for enlightenment. And so we were practicing these techniques. And in the beginning, that's all he was about, is just showing us those techniques. And then eventually, as his narcissistic pathology sort of set in, those techniques sort of got pushed by the wayside, and he became the object of, I don't want to say worship, because I didn't worship him, but a lot of people started to see him as a divine being. And so our goal was, like, I never wanted to worship him, as I never wanted to worship Jesus or the Buddha or whatever. I wanted to become them. I grew up as a Catholic. I left Catholicism at the age of reason, which to the Catholics is age 7. But it was never reasonable to me. However, I was really enamored by the saints and their stories, and I figured no matter what side, whether it's Eastern or Western, there are always, those beings, whether it's a Buddha or a Krishna or a Jesus, whatever. And all of these beings went through their spiritual journey to attain that enlightened state, that union with God. And so that was basically the goal, at least for myself and for most of my friends and colleagues in the beginning. And I was on that journey from the time I was 14. I took a comparative religions class. I went to Catholic school. So I took a comparative religions class, and in that we were studying Hinduism at the time. And there was a word, nirvana. And I asked the teacher what that meant, and he said, well, some yogis through a certain meditation practice experience God directly. Next question. And I'm like, wait, what? I said, is that true? And he goes, well, apparently, so from the time I was in 9th grade, I sort of set out on that possibility, that has to be possible, because at least we know of the stories of people throughout history that have attained some sort of union. So all of the saints in Christianity or in Catholicism all had that. So they had this ability to transcend body, mind, and have union. So that was what the basis of the origin of the Buddha field was. And it got through a period of time, it didn't happen overnight, but through a period of time, he became more narcissistic to the point that he became sociopathic, and the rest is a story. And that's what my book is about, is really examining what that pathology is. Where do we find it in our culture, both in spirituality and religion, including in politics, leaders in general. And so I'm a researcher, and I really sought to understand not only the decisions that I made in my life, but why we make the decisions we make.
Let me just ask you a little bit about this guy. So was he somebody that you met through friends? Like you had some friends who he was starting a group or whatever. He had a group going, oh, you got to meet
Yes.
this guy. You got to come in. Because that's
Yes.
a similar story to the Beatles, actually,
Exactly.
with the Maharishi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only they
It's sort of the same story.
They didn't stay in for 25 years. They stayed in for
Right.
about 25 minutes.
Right.
But it's
We had other things to do.
yeah, but it was like that. Okay, so, and I assume you were young, you were a teenager or early 20s?
No, I
No?
was in my late 20s, actually.
Late 20s? Okay. So
Uh-huh.
they brought you into this group, and it all started out seemingly okay, and then it just got weirder as it went along.
It did.
Okay, why did you stay for 25 years then?
Well, and again, that's what the book is about. That's a really tough and complex question, not to diminish the question, but once you've established yourself in a community, then this community becomes your family.
Okay.
And they become everything. I mean, you share things that on the outside nobody has shared, like very, very deep experiences. And so, it's sort of the mission of the narcissist to start to take control over your life, your environment, your influences. Any narcissist is competing with the outside. So there's all kinds of ways of starting to push the outside away or making the outside undesirable. Typically in any group, and again, it can be political, it can be religious, spiritual, it can be a lot of things, but a couple of the signs are the idea of exceptionalism, part of the dogma and the groupthink. I mean, Douglas, we referred to ourselves as holy company. And so that implies that everything that is not in the group is unholy company or unconscious company. So when you look at it, you want to stay amidst the company that you have an understanding with, number one. Number two, I mean, I left basically my life because it was not satisfactory to me. I wanted something deeper. And I grew up in a very affluent background in Beverly Hills and Brentwood in Los Angeles. It was very superficial. And especially in those days, it was not fulfilling to me. So once I found a group of like-minded people that were looking for something deeper, these were my peeps, right? So there's that. And then as the narcissist starts to manipulate you and separate you from the outside, he also shows you typically what'll happen to you if you leave. So there were people who left before me, and he ostracized them and demonized them and publicly, and which is typically going on in this country right now, and this separation, which is more of what this book is about. He showed us what would happen to us if we left. So even though I started to catch on to him and be uninterested in him by about 1995, I didn't leave the group till 2006. So I was conflicted for 11 years. And when I did leave, everything that I thought would happen did. They ostracized me and demonized me, and I lost everything. And that I knew I had to face. So it takes a lot of courage to leave a group like that.
Was he taking your money as well all this time?
Yes and no. That's a hard one. He wasn't. Some groups, are all about taking your money. Scientology is a big one where they pretty much, every level that you have to do is another 50,000. He wasn't really like that, except for he made his living, which makes it even more interesting and complex. He made his living as a hypnotherapist. So,
wow.
So not only were we paying for that every week, it wasn't a lot. It was like $50, but we were handing him our psyche every week. So he knew all of the skeletons in our closet. He knew all of our fears. So as a narcissistic sociopath, he would use that against you. So if you started to question, he would, say, Radhia, you remember when your father did this, and, you're just projecting that on me, that kind of stuff. So that was a form of manipulation. But on the other hand, although we were financially supporting him that way, we were also pretty much taking care of him. So, we cooked for him, and, I owned his house. Although the mortgage was being paid, it wasn't being paid by him. It was being paid by other members. And so, yes and no. No, we weren't writing big checks to him, but he was well taken care of by the group.
So he was more interested in stealing your soul rather than your money.
He was, and he was also a sexual predator.
Oh,
so
okay.
He was homosexual. So the women did not know about what was going on. So if you saw there was a Netflix series called Holy Hell. I was in that documentary that is about the group. That's on Amazon. And that's in the title of my book, Holy Hell and the Disciple of Narcissistic Leaders. And so anyone who saw the movie, and I recommend that you do, it was a top 10 on Netflix, and it was one of the top 10 at Sundance as well. It's a really good video. That'll give you an idea of what it was like in the Buddha field. Like people, but bear in mind, the filmmaker, Will Allen, he had 30 years of archival footage, and he had about 45 hours of footage that he had to sort of break down and edit down into 100 minutes. So he had to build this story arc, and he had to show you from beginning to end in 100 minutes, which is very, very difficult for the viewer, because they go, you see him at the end and you go, how could you ever fall for that? Well, it's over a period of 20 some odd years. So it was sort of like a frog in warm water. Once you realized what was happening, you were already submerged. So it made it much more complex to leave. And for the
Yeah.
women like myself, a sociopath is very skilled, very skilled. A narcissist is very skilled. They figure out what you want or what you need or what you're afraid of, and they create the illusion that they alone can give that to you. And so, especially when they're a hypnotherapist, they figure out individually what you want, what you need, and what you're afraid of, and they become that for you. So for me, he was not abusive to me. He was the opposite. He was a benevolent male. So I loved him. It was very difficult to leave him, even though I started to see his sickness starting to manifest. He became sort of like an eccentric uncle. It's like, what are you going to do? Throw him out? No, I still loved him, and I was attached to the group. So that
Right.
makes it very complex.
We are out of time, unfortunately. Thank you so much for coming on. I just had one quick question. Is he still alive?
He's not only still alive, but we kind of threw him out of Austin, and he picked up and moved to Hawaii
Oh,
and
okay.
started the group again.
So it's still
So
going. Yeah.
he's still around. When I knew him, he was in his late 30s, early 40s. He's now going to be 80 years old in November. So he's a totally different human being, but he's still there. He's just as sick or sicker, and he's got followers in Hawaii.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on this show. And your book is called The Followers. It is available. It's out now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, or you can go to my website, which is Radhia, Radhia, Gleis, Gleis.com, or you can go on Audibles as well. It's in my voice, and that's fun. Who knows the sarcasm better than I do?
Radhia, thanks so much for coming on the show. Interesting story.
Thanks, Douglas.